Do you think our country is experiencing a leadership or values gap right now?
Definitely, Mike.
From your perspective, what's the biggest generational shift leaders need to understand right now?
I love the fact that there are 5 generations in the workforce.
What changed in the employee relationship that led to this point?
I think it deals with the generational pendulum.
Welcome to I'm Up, He Sees Me, I'm Down. Conversations on leadership, faith, and resilience with Mike Turner. This show is proudly sponsored by Alamo Tech and Mission Solution Partners.
Welcome back to I'm Up, He Sees Me, I'm Down. This is a show where we talk about leadership, growth, and deeper forces shaping how people live, lead, and build organizations. Today, I'm joined by Dustin DeBoer, a leadership consultant who works with executives and organizations to help them understand how people are wired, how that wiring affects leadership, culture, hiring, and performance. And his work focuses heavily on self-awareness, personality alignment, and leadership development, helping organizations build strong teams by aligning people with roles that match their strengths and values. But Dustin also approaches leadership from a broader lens, looking at faith, generational change, and the cultural shift shaping the workplace today. So Dustin, welcome to the show. So glad to have you on here.
I am so glad to be here on the show with you. I love your title, by the way, Mike.
Oh, thank you.
I think it's a phenomenal title. When I first saw it, I was like, Mike's a man I can talk with and have a great podcast, because when it's I'm up or you're up, however you put it again, Mike, I love the fact that I'm seen by somebody greater than myself.
Yeah. So a lot of people don't really know this, but the background on it is that when I was in the Marines, it was instilled into us as we're attacking the hill, they say, as we're going towards the enemy. And they put in our brains to say to ourselves, I'm up, he sees me, I'm down. Meaning I'm up, I'm running towards the enemy. He sees me, I get down. Because that's about how much time you have between that whole, exercise before you're shot. So, wonderful. So thank you for that. Before we get into leadership and consulting, I always like to start with the person behind the work. So we had a conversation or two, and I found out you grew up in southern Minnesota, and the Midwest tends to have a pretty distinct culture when it comes to work ethic, family, and community. So let's start there. What was it like growing up in Minnesota, and how did that shape the way you think about leadership today?
Well, it is definitely true, Mike. I did grow up in southern Minnesota in a small town of 22,000 at that point. And I can say you're right on with the fact that the Midwest has a certain work ethic culture. A lot of my work revolves around the fact of just grinding through it. And I think that's a lot of the Midwest culture. Keep going. Don't give up. It's going to work out.
Yep.
But what I found in doing that myself is that we don't take time to think of why we're grinding. That tension of working hard without working towards something meaningful became the question that really just drove me to thinking about my entire career. And that path is not a straight line at all. And for me, it went from teaching, photography, sales leadership, to doing assessments. And each chapter really deepened my understanding of people. And like I said, that's not a straight through line, but it's what I did.
I love that. I mean, and you resonate with a lot of people. What they thought when they left high school is not what they're doing now. Or, when they went to college, they learned something about themselves or whatever the case is. But I find that very true. So let's, one of the things that stood out when we talked earlier was how much your faith and upbringing shaped your view of leadership and purpose. So for a lot of people, leadership is just about business strategy, right? That's the way they look at it.
Yep.
But for you, it sounds like it's much deeper. We mentioned it ties to values and personal responsibility. So I'm curious, how has faith influenced the way you approach leadership development?
To me, faith is one and the same with leadership. It's really the operating system behind it. It's not just the
I like that.
screen that we see on the computer. It's that operating system or OS behind it. It's the whose you are, not who you are. Most
Okay.
leadership development starts with just the self-awareness, the who you
Yeah.
are,
Right.
but it stops there.
That's
And
true.
the deeper question for me is, whose are you? That's where accountability comes in. That's where purpose comes in. And that's where something bigger than quarterly numbers or chasing numbers comes in. And when I met Dr. John Maxwell in 2026 at a leadership conference that I was not appointed to go to, but I got to go to, that was a radical change in my life. It was one of the most powerful opportunities that I ever had in the business world, was to actually literally meet him and have him sign the 15 Invaluable Laws of Growth. I'll never forget that opportunity. It was such a change in whose I was to know who I am.
Okay. So let's unpack that a little bit. So for those out there that are struggling with either their faith or, what that means, that this message is for you in a lot of ways. This is your PSA in a lot of ways to basically find Jesus Christ, find God, find what your foundation, what makes sense for you. I'm going to beat around the bush. I'm a Christian. I believe in Jesus Christ. And Dustin, I believe that's I can say that for you as well as a Christ believer. When you look at somebody that's in leadership or somebody that's in corporate, they're motivated by a paycheck. That's one thing. We all have to make it ends meet. But like you said about the spreadsheet or the report that needs to be done, and you're working on it till late in the evening or whatever, there's got to be something more in you that has value, that you value, that brings out in you than just saying, I'm getting this overtime or I'm doing it because it's my job. There's got to be more. It's the difference between happiness and joy. Okay, is the way I look at it. You can have happiness, but joy is, joy is external. Joy is not like happiness, or it's something that you're gifted with, and you have joy.
Absolutely agree with you on that one, Mike. Happiness is that inward feeling of just, I'm excited about what's going on. I'm really pleased. But that joy is that deeper inward, I can sit with this and I am extremely just, life is good because it's a deep indwelling.
Yes.
And it comes from that deep center of who
Right.
we are.
Yep.
That things are just whole. They're fitting together. They're going towards a bigger reality.
So let's pivot a little bit and let's feed that in a little bit. So this naturally leads into a broader question about where we are culturally. So a lot of people feel like we're living through a time where shared values are shifting or maybe even disappearing. And when values shift, leadership tends to get harder. So let me ask you this. Do you think our country is experiencing a leadership or values gap right now?
Definitely, Mike.
Okay.
The big thing that I see going on in that cultural shift is that there is a leadership gap, and it's downstream, though, of that values gap. It's an identity gap.
Okay.
Because people don't know what they're for. So they can't really lead well. John Maxwell and Rob Hoskins wrote Change Your World. And it's a third book in a series on that type of identity. And they identify 8 streams of society that shape culture. Those 8 streams are government, business, education, family, religion, media, arts, and healthcare. Each stream right now is in transition.
Yeah.
And the most important stage, though, isn't the boardroom. It's the front door of our homes. And leaders haven't figured out yet that Building anything but the stage of our family is building on sand.
Yep.
Because
Yep.
if we don't build a strong, stable family, we are building on quicksand.
Well, and it resonates well with me in that I'm hearing you. Lots of companies and owners, they understand that a happy employee is a productive employee. But what they haven't been able to correlate is what you're saying right now, that that the value, that the pieces, the beliefs, the foundational pieces are not there. Like, so, maybe they're a happy employee, but they don't have joy. So I'll take that back again. But yeah, okay. Well, here's the thing. So also, we're talking culture a little bit. You said, hey, they don't know what they stand for, but they know what they don't stand for. Like, we seem to be able to put a picket out there to have a protest about what we don't want, but we don't have the ability to stand up and go, this is what I want. So yeah. So what is your thoughts on that? How does that play into this? And how do we fix it?
How do we fix problems that we do want or don't want?
No, how do we fix this mindset of just going at this and saying, this is what I want in life, or this is what I stand for in life?
One of the things that I love helping people identify are their values and what do they really intrinsically stand for. Part of the assessment process is helping them bring those to the front.
Okay.
Based on their wiring.
Okay.
Because again, we try to fix institutions with people who haven't fixed themselves.
Yep.
That's not a strategy problem. That's a foundational problem of not identifying values first and clarifying values. Every institution I know of has certain values, but when we don't link up our values with what we're really trying to accomplish in life, there's that mismatch.
Right.
And so therefore we have a values alignment issue.
So let's shift into the work you do with organizations. So because a lot of companies today are struggling with this values problem, are there misaligned teams, hiring mistakes, disengaged employees, goes on and on and on. And your approach focuses heavily on self-awareness and personality alignment. So for someone who's never heard about this before, what kind of problems do organizations typically bring to you?
That's a fantastic question, Mike. And I really believe that companies that come to me, they come with the symptoms. And those symptoms are high turnover, team conflict. I mean, let's face it, a team conflict is inevitable when you don't understand the person you brought on. Bad hire, disengaged employee, cultural drift. But the real issue isn't always misalignment. It's that people in roles don't match with how they're actually wired. You know the old illustration, you're trying to get that square peg in a round hole.
Yep.
I mean,
yeah.
We're in the same generation. I think we know that language.
Yeah.
But leaders don't even always understand themselves well enough to actually understand how to use their innate talents, abilities, skills, knowledge, and style to actually lead a group of people who are different than them. And the way I come into it is to actually help someone understand how they're built before trying to develop the team. Because you can't develop what you don't understand.
Right. And you need to put it on paper. You need to have this. So obviously, one of the things we talked about, so I've got some insight on that, is that personality assessments like this come into play in this regard. So this is where, so you'll help us understand this a little better. How does understanding someone's personality profile change the way companies should hire and develop people?
And this is where I love a discussion with people because resumes, well, if you were to look at mine, that tells you what I've done,
Yeah.
but not really how they think or how you really decide something or what you are under that pressure cooker.
Right.
Let's put you into that slow cooker. I mean, you might come out and you might be barbecue, um, but we got to find out. Personality aligns you with your wiring, and wiring can predict how you actually behave better than experience alone. And how I can help with that is that our behavior previously doesn't always predict future. It does usually indicate how we're going to actually function. Not 100%, but more than likely. A person in the wrong role doesn't fail because they're a bad person usually. It's they fail because the environment around them isn't working with their natural slope or their natural design.
Well, and I think that's important because that's in your expertise. When you come in, you identify that kind of stuff. You make it easy for an organization to make some critical decisions that's ultimately going to catapult their productivity tenfold, right?
Right.
You know what the worst thing that an organization can do, honestly, is fire somebody, right? Letting somebody go, letting that talent leave, letting that knowledge leave, having to rehire, the expense to all that. All right. So let's talk a little bit more about this. So I think this is an interesting topic. So I wanna take this a step further and talk about another challenge leaders are facing right now is the fact that we have 5 or 6 generations working together at the same time. I think that's more than we've ever had in that I can remember. I mean, I'm a Gen Xer, so I always think about the generation above me and the generation below me, and I try to deal with that. But there's generations coming into the workforce that are completely built different than what I am, and as a Gen Xer, I think completely different than them. I think different than the Gen Zs. You name it. Well, Gen X is a different topic altogether, right? Like we're just there. We're the lock key generation or whatever. So let me ask you this: so at each generations have very different expectations around work, loyalty, and leadership. From your perspective, what's the biggest generational shifts leaders need to understand right now?
I love the fact that you said you were an Xer, Mike.
Yeah,
That doesn't mean, though, that you've been X'd out, just for everybody's
right,
clarification. I love the fact that there are 5 generations in the workforce. There's the boomers, the
right.
Xers, the millennials, the Zs, and I forget the other one. But the fact of the matter is, I love it because Tim Elmore is a colleague of John Maxwell. And Tim Elmore is the founder of Growing Leaders, and he's written books with John Maxwell. One of those books is A New Kind of Diversity. And in it, he makes the case that the general diversity of the most over diversity challenge in the workplace is the generational gaps. And only 8% of the US companies even recognize it as a diversity issue. I think that hits exactly with what you were saying. Would you not agree with that, Mike?
I would no, absolutely agree with that. Yeah. So, yeah, no, that absolutely does. And so let's give an example here. So something that comes up in leadership discussions today
Mm-hmm.
is the idea of quiet quitting or soft quitting. Like that's a generational thing. I would have never have thought to do something like that. So where employees stay in a role but mentally disengaged. So I'm curious about your perspective here. What changed in the employer-employee relationship that led to this point?
I think it deals with the generational pendulum. And the generational pendulum is that each generation has changed in reaction to the one before them. Okay? Boomers were success driven workaholics. Okay? They just worked Generation X, you and I, and everybody around us per se, became independent skeptics of just grind through it. We started to go, why? Millennials were overstructured. They didn't like all the structure built around them to create that environment. Generation Z, the ones under the millennials, craves authenticity and autonomy. Now, leaders fighting symptoms miss the pendulum entirely. They don't see this swing going on. Therefore, it creates artificial maturity. And that's one of the terms that Tim Elmore brings up. The younger generations are exposed to adult level experiences to process it. However, they're emotionally underdeveloped compared to what they're bringing in and their understanding. And that gap creates anxiety. And Gen Z is the most anxious generation ever actually documented. How then do you work with that? Because Gen Z doesn't really want a boss.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's where you have, as a leader, to make that shift, because 4 in 5 hiring managers for Gen Z say that Gen Z is the hardest ones to manage. And 1 in 3 avoid hiring them altogether. Since they don't want a boss, what do? They actually want more of a coach, a relational bridge, not a badge of authority. And so you have to be aware as a leader how to work with Gen Z to encourage them and develop them as people, not as a peg on the table.
So if we want a healthier society for the next generation, what kind of leaders should we be expecting? What you're almost giving them mixed signals in a way, is my words, but it's that you're telling a leader, you don't be a leader for the Gen Zs, but you need to be a strong leader for the millennials. But or even the millennials are starting to make up and they're being leader, right? That because Gen Xers are moving out. Like we're starting to question our existence in the workforce. Like we're approaching that age where we should be retiring or thinking about retiring, and now starting to get to that 50-year mark or whatever. And so a lot of things are happening for Gen Xers. So we have to have new leaders. So what kind of leaders do we need right now if we want to build a healthier society for the next generation?
We have to understand how people are truly wired for significance rather than just the internal success. And each generation looks at that a little differently, as well as people individually look at it differently. And when we as leaders can realize that leadership is influence, nothing more and nothing less, we can put together a pathway for people to really grow and not just plateau.
So, Dustin, this has been a really interesting conversation. We covered everything from growing up in Minnesota, leadership alignment, generational shifts. Before we wrap up, I want to give you a chance to tell listeners where they can learn more about you and your work. If someone listening today wants to connect with you or explore leadership development for their organization, where should they go?
I would definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. You can find me under Dustin DeBoer on LinkedIn. You can also connect with me on the318way.com. I will soon be having another branch of my family tree of invaluable leadership. And I am super excited about where I am going, because I know whose I am and who I am and what I am seeking to actually help other people do to excel in faith, family, and freedom, so that they can be that real success on the stage of life that matters most, their front door.
Yep. No, that's perfect. So, and to everyone listening, thank you for joining us this episode of Up He Sees Me, I'm Down. If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to subscribe and share this episode with someone who might benefit from it. We'll see you next time. Thanks again.
Thanks for listening to I'm Up, He Sees Me, I'm Down. Follow the show for more conversations on leadership, faith, and resilience. Sponsored by Alamo Tech and Mission Solution Partners.